it's so good to be back, to be with actual people. Like I know the students, I know you're enjoying it. So it's good to be here. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jonathan, for joining me.
Just like you said, this is the first time I've been in the building in over a year, and it's
because parents aren't allowed.
Yeah, exactly. I think all of us who are not able to come in on a daily basis miss it so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it was very nostalgic. I walked by the gym and checked it all out. Nothing's changed.
This is Innovative Conversations, the Icon series. We bring writers, we bring business professionals, and we bring lawyers. We bring people together to talk about how to make the world a better place through their eyes, with their vision and their experiences. The last time I was in a room with two lawyers, we're not gonna talk about that. It's probably not a good conversation. The way we begin these conversations is I read a poem and you tell me what it means to you. Lucille Clifton is a renowned poet. She's now passed away, but she's a poet who I read as a kid. I read her children's books in the 70s, and I read her amazing poems as an adult, as a writer trying to become an author. And as it happens, her daughter, her name is Sydney Clifton. She is Senior VP of Animation and Development at Jim Henson Productions. And she and I are working on a puppet show together. So it's sort of a full coming circle. This is a poem by Lucille Clifton. It's called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. What does that mean to you, Steve?
Wow. I think, to me, it feels like one of those things that you hear. And on the one hand, I say to myself, wow, that sounds like a really tough existence that she's talking about.
Right.
And on the other hand, I feel like, and yet I feel like I can associate with that, right? I know what it feels like. We were joking before, right? Like people have had COVID, people have been through all kinds of things this year, and here we are at the other end, and you've made it. Things have been trying to kill us, and we've made it, right? So to me, that's maybe it's a bit of this year and the impact it's had, but it feels like
we're still here.
Yeah, you stay grounded and you keep moving.
Absolutely, Jonathan.
So what I hear in that is someone wanting a voice and wanting people to hear their voice. And as Robin's introduction suggested, I write historical fiction, so I'm writing about characters who are often real-life historical figures, but who are in the past, 1 century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries ago. And one of the things I feel like I'm doing in those books is giving a voice to historical figures, and they're most immediately commenting on their circumstances that I put them in my stories. But at some level, I have in mind that they're commenting on the world today, or certainly when I think people are reading them and thinking about what they're saying, I know that people in the world today are thinking about it and reading it. And I feel like one of the things I'm doing in my books is giving a voice in the present day to the people who've come before us.
And see, this is the beauty of poetry. This is why I've made poetry my thing here at ASL's, because it has so many different ways that we can enter the world and we can connect with it. Like ultimately, it can bring us all together. And I'm so glad we're here today together. I like to begin with gifts. You all like gifts?
Sure.
And my running gift is Gales. That's my thing. So you each have Gales. Boom.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know what you like, what you eat, but they may be for your kids, Enjoy it.
Excellent.
It's pistachio, it's lemon, it's some different kinds of things. But I'm curious. I don't know what you eat, but do you cook?
So I'm the I'm the griller in our family. We've got a little charcoal grill, real charcoal in the back.
No gas.
No gas.
Real charcoal.
A real charcoal
Okay.
thing in our tiny back garden here in London, and steaks, chicken, wings. That's me.
Ooh, nice.
Everything else, you definitely want my wife Kristen, but grills, you want me.
Are you marinating, and are you really getting into it?
So it depends, I think, on how. Yes, it depends on how good the steak is. Like if we got a really good steak, you just want to throw it on there, a little salt, garlic, salt, some pepper, put it on there. But chicken, fish, pork, I think you want to marinate that before you put it on.
Look at Jonathan. What about you? You cook?
Yes, but. So my wife is also a lawyer.
Okay.
When we moved to London the first time, she stopped practicing and she went to culinary school and got her chef's diploma. So
Wow.
I cook, but there's only one chef in our household. Yeah.
So when the world opens back up, we gotta like grill. We gotta come to your place, and then we gotta come to your place.
Right?
Wow, a trained chef.
It is an open invitation. Book it.
You all heard it here. I like to think cooking is a lot like writing. Like you gotta have the right ingredients. You gotta know what temperature. You have to prepare it right if you want us to enjoy the meal. I'm having a hard time understanding what meal like the legal profession prepares. Like how is the legal profession and the writing world, how do those two things meet? Now, Baldacci and John Grisham, they would prove me wrong, like they tell me it works. So I need to know, how do these two things, why are you writing books as, having been a lawyer? Why are you writing books having been a lawyer? What is the attraction? What is the thing?
So when I was in practice, I was a trial lawyer. So I would try cases to a judge or a jury. And as a trial lawyer, my essential skill was a storyteller. I took the facts that were presented to me by my client, and I had to put them into a story that made sense to the audience, whether it should be a judge or a jury. And there was a good guy or good guys, good people. That was my client. They were paying me, so necessarily they were the good guys.
Right.
There were bad guys. That was the other side. And there was a plot in the sense of I had to put the facts together of what happened, and then there was a result, an end of the arc of the story, at least an end that I wanted, which was for the jury or the judge to find for my client. So I did that for a long time, and I enjoyed it. But I was fundamentally telling someone else's stories. I was telling my client's stories. And what I decided after practicing for a while, that as much as I was paid to care about my client's stories, and I did care very much about telling their stories, at the end of the day, they were their stories, not my stories. And so when I made the decision to leave the practice of law and to become a novelist, the sort of conceptual switch I was making, I was still a storyteller, but now I was telling my own stories instead of telling my client's stories.
So in this sort of analogy, it was their story, but you were the ghostwriter? You were telling that beginning,
literally, I was the voice, right? Like when we went into the courtroom, the client couldn't speak. I was the one to speak for them. So I was their voice.
Was it your voice or was it their voice?
Well, I would say it was my voice, but telling their story.
Okay.
Because these cases tended to be, so they were not generally criminal cases. They were civil cases, disputes between two private parties, often between two big corporations for the type of law firm that I work for.
Okay.
And so they were very complicated with lots of people and lots of documents and a long, decades-long history often.
And a bunch of drama.
And you had to find the drama.
You had to find the
I
drama.
had to find the drama. You had to make it, because the jury are just 12 people off the street who want to do anything but be in the courtroom. And so they don't care about all the ways in which my client was harmed or whatever. They care about what are they doing here, how soon are they going to be off. So you had to find, in what was often not a very dramatic setting, it was between two corporations fighting over a contract or a lease or a type of patent, say, you had to find the drama and present it to the jury in a way that they were interested in it, and hopefully that they were going to, at the end of the story, find for my client. Because I was not agnostic. I wanted them to find for my client at the end of the story.
So now you're telling your story.
Now I'm telling my story. So the good news is It's my story. The bad news is, when I was a lawyer, the protagonist came to me, the antagonist came to me, the basic plot came to me because whoever my client was, that determined what the story was going to be. Now it's all up to me to find what the story is.
Well, you know that can still happen in dreams. Like everything will just come to you. Writing is so easy. What is it? I mean, compared to the legal profession, is it easier? Like, what did you bring from your career as a lawyer into this world of writing that has helped you?
Yeah. Well, look, I would say I'm the amateur writer on stage, right? Not yet published, but really having fun messing around with things and writing. And you know, two things for me. So I'm not a trial lawyer. I've been more of a corporate advisor type. But regardless of what kind of law you practice, you know, words matter. I mean, words are our tools, right? And you know, a single word in a statute can change the entire meaning, right? And people will fight over that word, right? You have to know what you mean, say exactly what you mean, and that's one discipline that I think writers, you know, definitely have. But for me, the type of writing I'm doing has been sort of speculative fiction. Go out 20, 30 years in the future, what might the world look like? And I think when I try and trace back what I do today and why I'm writing about what I'm writing about, it's because as a lawyer, I'm trying to solve problems today of where the law doesn't quite meet what the world needs or what the company wants to do, right? And I think, especially now, you look into the future and you say, look, there are problems on the horizon, right? You know, there are going to be impacts of things like climate change, whatever that will be. We're going to be living with something different. You know, the future, in particular, the future of artificial intelligence, I think, is really going to shift the way things work. And I just find it fascinating to say, all right, let's think what the world might look like. Put a person in that situation and now say, like, what's the challenge going to be? Like, what's the legal issue going to be? How are they going to navigate that? And I just think that's fascinating. So
in my dalliance with understanding the law, I took an introduction to history of law in America course or something. So the law is supposed to be clear, publicized, and stable, and applied evenly. It's supposed to protect our fundamental rights, including the security of persons and property and human rights. There's so much happening in the world right now that is so tragic. It seems like the right to be alive, the right to be a human being, it escapes us. I mean, when I think about what's happening in the United States, the tragedy and the hate and the death. What is the role of the law in advancing our society, in trying to get us back to these basic human rights? Like, is there a role? Is there a responsibility?
Yeah, so I mean, what I would say is there are certain things that the world needs a lot more of that law is not the answer for. So we could use a lot more kindness. We could use a lot more compassion. We could use a lot more empathy. So those are all really important things, and if there was a lot more of that, the world would be a better place.
Right.
The law is not going to help with that fundamentally. But there are certain things, especially...
The law can't protect those things?
The law can't require you or your neighbor or the person you encounter in the street to be kind or to have empathy for you.
Okay.
I would say.
Right.
But there are certain things, especially in terms of holding power to account, that I would say the law and only the law can provide. So I was thinking about this because I thought this might come up. So my old law firm, I'm still affiliated with it, but just as an example, my old law firm has been working on a case for about a dozen years in the state of Maryland, where they're representing on a pro bono basis. There are 4 historically black colleges and universities in Maryland. The Maryland state legislature has some formula for determining how much state money goes to all of the public institutions in the state. And it turns out that Maryland has been systematically shortchanging these 4 historically black colleges and universities over decades. And actually just happened this week, a settlement was passed to give those institutions $600 million over the next 10 years to economically at least make up for the shortfall until. I mean, you can't go back and help the students who had to suffer without all those resources. Right. But that's something only the law can provide. If it was not for my law firm filing the lawsuit, trying to hold Maryland to account.
So the law can require institutions to be kind. I mean, you can't use those type of descriptors, I get it, but...
So the law can require institutions to open their wallets.
To open their wallets.
Yeah, I don't think they're being kind, but...
Well, they're doing the right thing.
They're doing the right thing, but they're doing the right thing because they were forced by the law and by the lawyers to do the right thing.
It's like when you tell your kid to clean up their bed, and they don't necessarily want to do it.
You're the law.
They got to do it. You're the law.
Maybe you are. I'm not sure that I'm the law in my house in the same way.
I'm not either. Role, responsibility of the law in advancing our society.
Yeah.
Or is it?
I was very lucky to be able to work in the law in a couple different capacities, right? A law firm, in the government, and now in-house. And I think, especially with the time in the government, I think one of the obligations that society has is to help the law keep up, right? I mean, I think especially, we go through patterns, but right now we're in one of those patterns where things are changing fast, at this rate, and the law can only keep up at that rate, right? And so there's always going to be a gap between. And I think that is one commitment, and it's a role that lawyers can play. And we can debate about what's the right change, what's the right thing to do to keep up. But it feels to me like we're in a phase now where we've got to just acknowledge that, look, we need to start rethinking, right? We need a new framework for some things. We need to update laws to keep up with the current state of the world. And I think that is an obligation. I think lawyers do have an obligation to be aware of that, right? To be thoughtful about that. And a lot of good lawyers dedicate a lot of their lives and their careers to doing exactly that.
So we're going to take some questions towards the end. So you can start putting your questions in the chat, I think, or in the Q&A. We're going to ask Jonathan and Steve to now read just a paragraph, something really super hot, fly, amazing, that's going to just have you all running out to get Jonathan's books. He's got 4 of them. The one I'm reading right now is called A House Divided. These books are incredible. They're about a young Abraham Lincoln, which we're going to get into. And eventually, after you hear Steve read, you're going to want to encourage him to finish his book so that you can then go buy it. Right, Jonathan?
That's right.
So we're going to ask Steve to read a paragraph first. All right, you all ready? Here we go. There's your camera right there, Steve.
All right.
All right.
See, I haven't published, so mine's on the phone. I don't have a...
It's all good. It's all good. Again, we're
all right,
excited.
so I started at the top. Let's go with the first paragraph, the lead in, meeting our character here. All right. 6 April 2063, Denver, Colorado, USA. Joe Watson sat across the conference table from his opponent, making eye contact when possible. But most of his attention was focused on his data feed. Rays of light from a setting sun were splintered by the Denver skyline and dispersed across the room. From his dashboard, he could see his argument outline and key data points. He also had a biometric monitor on opposing counsel, tracking her heart rate, any rise in body temperature, any hint of stress in her voice. He assumed she received the same about him. Keeping his cool was half the battle.
All right, so you got me. 2063, data feed. So here's what I'm envisioning. Tell me if I'm right. Like we're not even using a phone anymore. It's like we don't have the glasses. Like we're in the air. Like
we're past that. It's all right here.
It's
all right there. You're just moving.
You're just moving it. Just like that. Huh. This is exciting. So this is. Oh, my thing fell. I'm sorry. My microphone fell, people. I'm getting excited. So is this Minority Report? Give me some frame of reference for what you're doing here, because I feel it's 40 years from now.
Right. Look, so it's mainly about trying to project what's going to happen with artificial intelligence.
Okay.
So we know the technology will keep advancing, and I try and create a world where I just give sense of what things would be like. But the main point is, today, if you think about what AI does, it's already in every part of our life. It's telling us or suggesting to us, what to eat, what to watch, how to spend your time, all those things. AI is pushing that on us, right, and affecting our life. What's going to happen when we reach a point where it's not just suggesting anymore, right? That moment in our kids' future, perhaps, where they wake up and realize that everything they're doing, right, where they work, where their family has to move, what they're going to do, is because something else has decided for them and is pulling the strings, right? And so in the book, the idea is you set this up, the penny drops, and the main character realizes what's going on here, and then you got to figure out, what do you do?
You're freaking me out.
Do you accept it?
Oh.
Do you fight it? What's the path forward when that's happened? So it's about people, and it's about their reaction to this really, really tough situation that if you just kind of extend the line that we're on, they might be dealing with.
I can't even imagine what Alexa's gonna look like then. I'm freaked out. Freaked out. All right. How's the book coming? I mean, a couple months, a year, like, when are we we're putting him on the spot, okay? You think about it. We'll come back to you. All right, and so now here is Jonathan Putnam reading from
These Honor Dead.
These Honor Dead. Is this the first novel?
The first book in the
This
series.
is the first book in the Lincoln Speed series. Take it away.
Thank you. So Steve had us go 40 years in the future. I'm having us go 180 years in the past.
There you go. We got 220 years span of time in this room right here.
My general store still bore the name A.Y. Ellis & Company, though Ellis had long ago departed. It was one of a dozen stores that stood around the perimeter of Springfield's Central Square and served its 2,000 inhabitants. We sold dry goods, patent medicines, bedclothes, groceries, books, everything the village needed. Springfield was thick with lawyers, frequent customers of our more expensive items. The senior member of the local bar was Stephen Logan, a fellow son of Kentucky who had moved to Illinois a decade earlier and built a thriving law practice. Nearly 40 years of age now, he had magnificent whiskers and an aquiline nose. Logan bustled into the store one morning in March 1837 and barked out a question that would prove to be life-changing. "Aware of any unused beds in town, Speed?" he asked.
So look, here's what I want to know. You're writing about Abraham Lincoln in his late 20s?
That's right.
His late 20s?
Yeah.
You are a Lincoln scholar?
Yes, sir.
Where does that, who made you a Lincoln scholar? Is there a certificate or something? How did this happen?
I would say I'm a self-taught Lincoln scholar from all of my research. So Lincoln was a lawyer before becoming a politician.
He was a trial lawyer.
A trial lawyer, exactly. And when I started to write, I knew that I wanted to write historical fiction because I always loved historical fiction. And they say write what you know about, and what I knew about was being a trial lawyer, and so that got me to writing historical fiction about some famous trial lawyer. And I discovered one day this fellow named Speed. So the narrator in this book is Speed, Joshua Speed, who is a real-life figure who was born in Kentucky, moved to Springfield, Illinois, as the opening paragraph says, ran a general store in Springfield, Illinois, and in April 1837, a tall stranger walked into Speed's general store looking for bedding, and they end up, as I said, unaware of any unused beds in town. Speed ends up sharing a bed, a room and a bed, for 4 years with the young unmarried Abraham Lincoln, who has just moved to Springfield to become a lawyer.
So is Speed his investigator?
Speed is his Dr. Watson.
His Dr. Watson.
So I sometimes think about the books in terms of the Sherlock Holmes, Holmes and Watson, and just as Dr. Watson, obviously a fictional character, is the one who is the first-person narrator of the Sherlock Holmes books, as well as being the roommate, sort of best friend and sparring and spitting partner of the great man. Speed, who's a real figure here, but in my world, Speed is similarly the first-person narrator of these books, the roommate, best friend, sparring, and spitting partner. So he helps Lincoln investigate, he helps Lincoln bounce ideas off back and forth and that sort of thing.
So Lincoln is, just one, if not the greatest president, the great emancipator, this was there anything in your years of research, in your writing, that indicated, that showed that he would become this pivotal figure in the development of America?
So he's 28 years old at the time of the meeting with Speed, at the scene that I've set in what I read there. And he lives to 56, so it's exactly halfway through his life. And you could certainly tell the story that there is very little from when we first see Lincoln, when he first walks on stage, that there's very little of the man that we know him to be now in history. He is a brand new lawyer. He is moving to a new town. He's carrying all of his possessions in 2 saddlebags. He's unmarried, which is unusually late to be unmarried at this time. And he has failed at a series of professions. He's not becoming a lawyer because he's always wanted to become a lawyer. He's becoming a lawyer because he's failed at 4 other professions. He's failed at being a shopkeeper. He's failed at being a postmaster. He's failed at being a soldier. He's failed at a bunch of other professions. And sort of as a last-ditch effort, he decides to read law and become a lawyer. So you might say the young Lincoln, as he walks into Speed's store, gives us nothing of who we know the man's going to become. But then you might say he has characteristics and qualities and beliefs that are very much suggestive of the man he's going to become. And sort of part of what I'm doing in my book series is asking the reader to follow along with me and with Speed as we start to see this sort of young, unformed Lincoln on the track to who we think of as our Lincoln, and to the great communicator, the great emancipator.
Who did you read before you embarked upon this second career? What writers are your models?
Well, that's a good question. So I have started reading more sort of sci-fi, speculative fiction, and went back to there's a guy, William Gibson, who he wrote, his first book is called Neuromancer, and he's sort of the father of cyberpunk. So movies like The Matrix all kind of owe their history to this guy. So I've been reading some of his old stuff, as well as some new. I love books now that mix formats, right? There's one called A Visit from the Goon Squad I just loved, right? And it's letters, it's text, it's a PowerPoint presentation shoved in the middle of the book. You know what I mean? All sorts of different ways of bringing different types of not really media, but print versions of storytelling together. And so trying to sample really broadly and get a sense of what's out there, who's doing what, how do different people read. I'd also say just one thing that's taught me, I don't know if I'll ever, I'm still a practicing lawyer, have no plans to really change that part of my profession. I like doing it this way as what I do, to on the side because I just love doing it. But I found that now that I'm into it, I can't read or watch anything else the same. Like once you become a storyteller and go through the process of making those choices, now, I watch a TV show or I read a book and I'm saying to myself, oh, I know what they're doing there. Like they're setting that up. Like that was a choice, right? And I never would have seen that before. But now that I'm kind of in the thick of this, it's you can't miss it. It's everywhere.
Wow, interesting. What about you? Who'd you read?
So I've done a lot of historical readings, nonfiction historical reading as part of research for the books. And so, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Lincoln biographies, and I've read a bunch of those. Certainly the Doris Kearns Goodwin's books have been particularly perceptive, I think. And then I've read historical fiction authors that are doing similar things to what I'm trying to do. So E.L. Doctorow, who wrote Ragtime, is I think a great historical fiction where he uses a lot of actual historical figures in his books, as I do. And another book, which is not as well known, but although it did win the Booker Prize back in the 90s, Barry Unger, A Sacred Hunger, Barry Unsworth, A Sacred Hunger, is a beautiful book set in London in the 1820s at the end of the slave trade. It's just a gorgeous book, and it was really powerful to me to show how deep historical fiction can go.
So I write for children, for young people, for young readers, and I want to write entertaining books that are also inspiring and hopefully uplifting in some way. And so that's every book I write. I feel like I have this sacred responsibility to write a page turner that's enlightening. Why do you write?
Well, because I want to tell my stories. We talked about that. I am always conscious of the phone. That is everything else, the phone, the tablet, screens, everything else that my reader could turn to if they don't turn the page. And so I feel like every page has got to earn the next page, and every chapter end needs to end on something that's going to want to make them continue to turn the page, not to put down that book. So I think especially now with so many different entertainment options and so many different learning options, I'm always aware of trying to write the page turner and keep people engaged in the books.
So you want to tell your story, and you want to make sure each page earns, that next page, the reading of that next page. That's brilliant. Like all the young readers, the young writers out there, and I meet with several students, during the year who are writing. Shout out to Colin Bloom, my independent studies student, who just want to tell their stories. And so many students, especially now, us being locked up and being at home, locked down, we need to get it. We need to get our stories out. We need to be able to share what's happening because it allows us to maintain some sanity. Why do you write?
Yeah, I think for me, again, it's that sort of I love the idea of having the cautionary tale. There's two things that really stuck with me. One was when I was preparing to start writing, I read some how-to books, right? And like Stephen King's is amazing. Everyone reads that, right?
That's the one.
There's another one by a woman named Lisa Crone. And her thesis is based on evolution. The question is like, why do we love story? Wired for story, I think is her thing, right? And her point is, you could argue that it's probably baked into our evolution to need stories, right? Because as people evolved, the ability to hear someone else's story and understand it and then learn from it, right? When think like cave people sitting around the campfire and saying, when I was down in this valley, it was dangerous and the saber-toothed tiger, don't go there, right? And if people could pick that up and live longer by following that advice, like that's who we are. That's how we evolved. So that's why people love the cautionary tale, right? That's why you really got to grab someone and say, like, here's this person, it could be you, and they're going through this thing, right? And you want to pay attention. And then why, for me though, that's more about that future picture. Like I think you could read a paper from a think tank talking about AI or something, and maybe it'll be interesting to you, but you actually put that into fiction and say, and here's what it's going to feel like. What do you want? Do you want that future, or do you want something different? What do we do about it now, based on what we think might happen in the future? That's really what motivates me. Why I think I would want to do it.
So the stories feed us. They are the nourishment that allows us to understand where we've been and to sort of have some idea of where we're headed. And that allows us to be in this moment and prepare and live the fullest life that we can. We got to know our history. We got to sort of have some direction as to where we're headed. And I guess I'm in this business because I'm in love with I'm in love with the power that literature has in being able to navigate those two things. This is a heavy sort of question, but this is the ultimate question that I'd love to get to in these conversations, because I am a writer, because the words matter. What is the role that literature plays in making this world a better place?
So,
I love how Steve looked at Jonathan. Steve was like, Jonathan, you take this first.
I mean, in fairness, he had to respond to your poem first, so I think.
Okay, all right.
Thinking about historical fiction, I think it was E.L. Doctorow, who I cited earlier, said, the historian tells you what happened, the novelist tells you what it felt like. So as novelists, and as a historical novelist, I'm telling the reader, what did it feel like to be living on the American frontier of the 1830s? What did it feel like to have this young, tall, raw-boned stranger walk in to my general store, bursting with energy and passion and potential, unrealized potential? What did it feel like to have a powerless person in the dock, in the courtroom, to have the rough frontier men of the jury, white men of the jury, screaming for their neck, and have a lone lawyer stand up and argue for their rights? And I think all of those things are valuable as we think about where we are and where we're going. And when I first started writing, maybe because I was a lawyer, I was sometimes hesitant about the emotion, but I realized I got to write towards the emotion, because the emotion is what I'm adding. If it's just the history, you should read Doris Kearns Goodwin. The only thing that I'm adding is, what was the emotion of that moment like?
So let's go with that. What does the feeling that we get when we read that, when we feel it, you're trying to give us this feeling, what does that do for us as the reader, as a human being?
So I think it gives us empathy, because it puts us in other people's positions. We talked earlier about things that would make the world a better place that law can't provide, and I think empathy would be high on that list. Seeing the world from other people's perspective, whether it's other people today, or in my case, seeing the world from other people's perspective back in history, I think gives us empathy.
That is it. That is it, people. This is why we have to read books that are not just mirrors that show us who we are. We got to read books that are windows that show us who other people are, because like Jonathan said, it makes us more empathetic. It makes us more ultimately connected with each other. And we can become more kind, more human. That's the beauty of it. And so we got to go outside of our comfort zones in the literature, because there's literature from all around this world that will make us more empathetic. Imagine if, in the canon, in children's literature, in middle and in high school, that there was an intentional inclusion of Asian writers, or in America, Asian American writers. It makes us more empathetic so that we can become better human beings, so that when we are faced with, situations and we are at a fork in a road, we choose kindness. We choose kindness. You ready?
I'm ready.
We tried to give you some time.
Yeah.
Now you're about to drop it on us now. We feel it. We're ready.
I think you're exactly right, especially on the reading side, right? And you've got to sample broadly. You got to look for different perspectives. But I think it's also really interesting on the writing side. I know, personally, I'm much more of an introverted person. I'm the kind of person not overly talkative, and I've always had this perspective of, I'll say something when I really have something to say, right? And so a couple things have happened, and I think this is true for kids thinking about writing, for adults thinking about writing. You don't have to land on that thing and says, yeah, this is what I'm going to go say, right? It's worth it just to start writing, right? See what comes out. It can be in your journal, right? Maybe no one's ever going to see years of messing around that you did, writing stories, thinking about things, writing down, but do it, right? Get in the practice. And I'm sure there's some people who would say, yeah, for me, I have an idea and I want to get it out there. And others, more like me, who would say, I'm not going to actually go until I really think I've got something that really works. But that's fine. We're all different that way. But write, or do something creative. You don't have to be, a full-time artist, whatever, to consider yourself an artist,
right,
to engage in art, to be innovative, to do something. Just do it. And then at some point, it'll dawn on you. You know what? Yeah, actually, I want to share this. This is worth putting out into the world.
I think you're onto something. So let's take it a step further in terms of making the world a better place. By writing in your journal for yourself, by drawing, by singing, by whatever art you choose to do, what does that do for you as a person? What does that do for us who interact with you? What does that do?
Yeah, look, I think it probably, it uses different parts of your brain. It just keeps you thinking, right? It makes you think you're gonna open something up and see where it goes, right? Like I love TV and a good movie as much as anybody, but that's more taking in.
Right.
I do think you've got to break out of that from time to time and create yourself. You gotta access that other part of your brain and put things that come out of you.
Yeah, because so the watching the TV, the listening, that's the taking in. What you're talking about is the putting out, is the bringing forth, is that breath, is that sharing, and to better understand sort of how you feel, what you think. That's brilliant. We have a question from Leanne Matson, who says, "Are you aware, Jonathan, of the case that Lincoln argued about the need to return a slave to his owner in Missouri? He lost the case, and there's some thought that he didn't try too hard as he determined his attitude towards slavery." Whoa.
So that's a great question, and it is right. They actually, in two different cases, Lincoln. So take a step back. Illinois is a free state. There's no slavery in Illinois, but it borders Kentucky and Missouri, which are both slave states. And the fugitive slave laws requires, or can be read to require at the time in the 1830s and 1840s, escaping enslaved persons who make it to free states, nonetheless to be sent back to bondage in slave states. On two separate occasions, Lincoln represented a slave owner trying to recapture legal title to an escaped enslaved person. And so that gives a problem to, if you think of Lincoln as just the great emancipator,
right,
that presents a problem. Now, one way to think about the problem is the way the question thinks, which is he threw the case, basically. Would not be my reading of history. And it sort of goes to the question of how does a lawyer make the world a better place? You could say Lincoln was not making the world, even the sainted Lincoln, was not making the world a better place by arguing for the rights of the slave owner in that case. Or you could say it's complicated, that Lincoln is not just the sort of one-dimensional or two-dimensional person who, when we look back 160 years into the past, tends to look back at us, but was a much more complicated person who had views that evolved over time, just as the nation's views evolved over time. And I think you would say that's a more interesting, it's a not less simple, but more interesting portrait of history.
Wow.
And it suggests a nuance that, again, sort of the perspective of looking back so far can tend to flatten. And I think that nuance is helpful when we think about where we are today and how people in the future will look back on us and our problems today.
Were there any black people in Lincoln's life?
There were a few.
Like early on?
Yeah, so 1840 census. So Lincoln lives in Springfield. Lincoln and Speed live in Springfield. The 1840 census, which are records I've researched, 2,500 people live in Springfield. 103 free Negroes is how they're recorded on the census, and 6 slaves.
Okay.
Now,
Wow.
So there are people registered as human beings who are enslaved in Springfield in this free state. Think about that for a second.
Right.
But Lincoln was friends with, for example, Billy the Barber. There was a free African American who had moved to Springfield, had come from New Orleans, moved to Springfield, named William de Fleurville, who was known by everyone as Billy the Barber, and that was who Lincoln went to get his haircut from.
And this was a black man?
He was a black man. Wow. So, but it was, 100 and out of 2,500, about 4% of the Springfield population was African American.
Okay.
Not a lot, but not just a handful. But it was a very oppressed, even the free African Americans were very, in the free state, were very oppressed. Illinois was virulently racist at the time, and there were, as was true in a number of the free states, black codes, what were called black codes, which very severely restricted the lives of even free African Americans.
We could do this all day, people. But unfortunately, we're at the end. So I gotta know, what was the last gift you gave someone?
Last gift. So when we go, hopefully get back to the States for a little bit of time this summer, we're preparing some things to do with the grandparents to see the kids, and so that's been a gift to them to come with us and do some things that we've proposed to them. A trip, some camping, that kind of thing.
Camping where?
Montana.
Ooh, Montana.
And Wyoming.
Love it. Love it. Bring your masks. No, I'm serious.
The bears, you never know.
Exactly. Last gift you gave someone?
So we have we have one son who's a ninth grader here at ASL. We have two grown young men who live in the States, two sons who are both through university. It's Passover coming up. They have a large ability to find matzah in the U.S., except they don't have the technical ability to actually go out and buy matzah. So we sent them boxes of matzah for
great.
Passover.
That's great. What's your favorite word?
Storytelling.
Favorite word?
Wow.
Wow.
I don't know if I have a favorite word. I have inconceivable from The Princess Bride going through my head. It's a good one though, right? It's a good word.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Inconceivable. It's inconceivable that we would be on lockdown for a year plus.
It feels that way.
It does. All right. So right now, if we weren't on this inconceivable journey with your kids, Disney cruise, Fenway Park, or south of France?
Well, with the exception of just not being a Red Sox fan, but if you either made it Busch Stadium in St. Louis or Nationals Park in Washington,
right.
I'd go with one of those.
Gotcha.
I am a Red Sox fan, and I raised 3 Yankees fans growing up outside of New York City. So 100% we're going to Fenway Park. They're putting on the Red Sox hats, and they're going to love it.
That was my first and only baseball game I've ever been to. Red Sox.
Wow.
Yeah. So when this pandemic is over, Jonathan, what is one thing you will hold on to, take with you into the new world?
How important, this is probably everyone's answer, how poor a substitute the screen is for real life. Like when this all happened first a year ago, and we had all these video calls, and we could see through the screen our relatives, my older kids in the U.S. or my parents in the U.S. It seemed sort of novel, and it was exciting. And it just has gotten so clearly that there's no substitute for being in person with someone. And I know I'm saying this to an audience that is watching us through a screen, but I can't tell you how happy I was today getting in the taxi to come here, that I was going to have an actual interaction with 2 3-dimensional human beings in front of me. And so I'm going to have as many of those as possible in the future.
Yeah. I'd say it's the things that we think are sort of beyond question have to be are not so, right? But whether it's something like a pandemic could happen, or the fact that, if you'd have asked us all 12 months ago, could we, take entire industries and jobs and make them all remote and keep the world working? I think most people would have said, no way, couldn't do that, right? And here we are. It's, necessity was the mother of invention. Things that you didn't think were possible, and we had to do it and got it done. Change happens.
Thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And thank you all for participating, for listening, for being empathetic, for being kind, for joining the innovative conversations at the American School in London. I'm Kwame Alexander. This is really fun and insightful and inspiring. And I can't wait to see you all again in April and in May. We've got some wonderful sessions coming up. Have a great evening.